Do I need a microphone or?
Shouldn't be.
Yeah, okay. So thank you so much to the organisers for your very kind invitation, in particular to the chair, Graham, to Nick, for Jonathan and Anne. Thank you so much for your invitation. It's a real honour to be here, actually, because I departed from computing as someone who did a O-level in computing and then felt I couldn't do it at A-level because the maths was too much for me. But actually there's always a way back in, I think, to your passions. So I've given this spectacular problem to myself of a title called Machines Dreaming of Machines, and you'll be pleased to know that this title came to me in a dream. So let's go with that. So it's a speculative conversation, really, to have this opportunity to kind of think about ourselves in relation to consciousness and technology. And I think our previous speaker should have my title of Associate Professor in Immersive Media, because that history, I feel educated now. I feel like I'm okay with that title, having listened to your talk. So thinking about dreams then as a kind of well-documented phenomena in humans, my background's in neuroscience. Unfortunately, the neuroscience that I wanted to study was not the neuroscience that I got, which was kind of the idea that you would cut up animals and you'd understand how they worked. Soon put a stop to that and moved into the arts. So this complex interplay of memories, experiences and emotions, so whether we're asleep or we're awake, this kind of form of mental stimulation that allows us to explore scenarios at kind of low risk that can lead to creative insights in the processing of emotions. And so I kind of want to focus really in thinking about machines, dreaming of machines, if machines could possess a kind of similar capability of this kind of self-introspection, if you like, that to some extent is beyond our control when we get in the right state of mind to dream. How does this stretch the boundaries of our current understanding of consciousness and of AI? What might we look to consider the possibilities to transplant this phenomena of dreaming into machines, and what kinds of leaps might this require in how AI and AI systems are conceptualized currently? So kind of thinking differently of the trajectory of artificial intelligence. And I'm hoping there's enough practitioners in the room that will get excited by that perspective and to know that I don't know the answers. I hope it's a conversation. So how do we get to a place where machines possess this form of introspection akin to creativity which dreaming could facilitate? So in this talk I'm going to look, for the most part, to the arts and artists and considering life with intelligent machines. So the kind of first artwork that I'll mention is this piece by Anneke Yi, which I saw at the Turbine Hall, which I found absolutely enriching in watching it, to see these kind of machines that have been created. They were moving through the Turbine Hall, if you've been there, above and below, and you had this sense that they were alive in some kind of interesting way. And they kind of really took me out of my present moment in walking into the gallery space. So thinking about the gallery space as creating the conditions for dreaming, if you like, whilst we're awake, which I think is quite important. But what this piece was speaking to was it was considering the industrial history of the turbine hall and how it was originally used to convert electricity for machines. So the artist had the idea that to re-inhabit the hall with biological machines, this was a kind of kin species, if you like. So rather than machines performing and strictly serving humans, in the vein of our Dartmouth forefathers of artificial intelligence, the artist was wondering would it feel like to share the world with machines that could live in the wild and evolve on their own, and that was kind of the idea behind this particular piece. So let's see if it's going to work. Excellent. Kind of side story but connected at the same time. I was one of those people at school who was very distracted. I didn't like to sit down and be in the classroom. I'd much rather be outside looking at the world or playing football or whatever. But I did manage to sometimes win prizes with essays that I'd written about. You'd have a freedom to write something that you wanted to write rather than the task at hand. And when I would win a prize, I'd be able to get a book. And so I found James Lovelock by winning a prize. I think this was for biology. And I'd originally asked for, I think it was some kind of teenage love story. And then my teacher came back to me and said, remember, everyone is going to hear about the book that you've wanted to buy about the secret life of lesbians. 13-year-old, do you want to, do you want the world to know about that, including your mother? And so they said, maybe you should buy another book. And that's how I came to James Lovelock's Gaia Theory. And actually, it was quite an interesting book in the end anyway. But to James Lovelock, thinking about this age of intelligence that we're in and thinking beyond life as us as human beings and what we leave behind, that the life beyond the Anthropocene, and he's calling it the Novacene, will have a logic unlike ours. It will be multi-dimensional. It will be a next or even a final step in the development of the evolution of the cosmos. And I think Lovelock says that at an interesting point in his life, because he's over 90 when he's written this book. So it's really interesting for him to look back on that and think about being close to not being with us and his own legacy. But of course, there's a long history of human imagination creating artificial and automated liveliness. Whether we look at the polymath Al-Jazari in 1206, or we look to the first designs of automated musical robots. But behind each of these kind of visions are really interesting stories of the creator and interesting conditions in which that creator's lived. So I'd really invite people to not just look at the pieces of work, but the cultures from which these machines and these ideas about automation was bringing. And it says perhaps more to people's relationship and their bodies to the world, their fears, their hopes, their dreams, what they perhaps hope to overcome, whether we're looking at kind of Greek poets or Jacques de Vaucanson's automated duck that can also do it. It has digestion, and it's fascinating. But when you look into it, he had problems with digestion. So there's a kind of obsession that's making itself into the work, which I think is really interesting. And so I really enjoy Ursula Franklin's podcasts, which has been made into a book. So thinking about, and I kind of use this for my students, thinking about technology as ideas and dreams and practices and procedures and hopes and myths. And then that Ursula was an experimental physicist. There's this possibility for disciplinary fantasticness in thinking about technology that our previous talk kind of illuminated. And Ursula also describes extended reality as a kind of body of knowledge and emotions we acquire based on the experience of others. And this extension of our own reality through technology as practice creates our world. And I can say, I now have a walking stick, and I'm very reliant on, I've called my walking stick Lambert, after very cheap, horrible cigarettes that I used to smoke many years ago, but I've been giving up, Lambert and Butler, if you must know. But my Lambert, my walking stick, we're interdependent. This is my extension of my world and helps me navigate through the world. And many disabled scholars, people like Louise Hickman, have gone on to really, talk about and write about the importance of the environment in thinking about intelligence and interdependence of being a disabled person, and how we're not on our own. We're kind of propped up by those around us or limited by barriers. So the thing that I wanted to riff off of, and to do my social scientist colleagues justice, we did this fantastic project called Patterns in Practice that was looking at the cultures of AI practice in the arts. And I think I was brought in perhaps to disrupt it a little bit by working on the arts practice side of our case study. And we were looking at practitioners' beliefs, values and emotions and how they shape practitioners' engagements with machine learning. So looking at a number of settings from chem informatics to higher education to the arts, and I was leading on the arts case study, which we had an artist residency. I always think, if you can, build in artists into your work and pay them a good fee so that they can get their work done, but also work with good partners who can look after the artist and create that environment in which the artist can do their best thinking. So we partnered up with Watershed, which is where my research centre is based. So it's a technical report. You can look into kind of where we got with that. But the bit that I get excited about, I should say focus on the research questions first, because someone might be interested in that. So the research questions was looking at these culturally situated beliefs in the different case studies and how people are interacting in their different contexts of practice. And then how do these dynamics influence the relationships between practitioners and the people that are impacted by their work? So whether using machine learning and data mining, and then we've done a series of dialogues that kind of allow us to think about across that more deeply, beyond our own research tools as social scientists, which is effectively to interview people with a series of questions framed by our research questions and framed by our interests. So these are the kind of key themes that came out of the research, and this is Monica and Itzel who did all of the qualitative research, and they're now lecturers and teachers at University of Sheffield, and doing their own independent work. But these themes are going to be kind of scattered in amongst my talk, and you might kind of notice them, and sometimes they will kind of work together. So this idea of feeding the machine, now with machine learning, kind of sprung out of the chem informatics case study mainly, where the idea was that the managers, data managers, the people in charge would kind of say, look, we just need to get more data sets and just keep feeding the machine, that's what we need to do. But actually also there's ways in which the artists think about feeding the machine with different kinds of data sets, and we can jump to the theme about tactics of resistance, where the artists are really kind of considering ways to resist this notion of feeding the machine lots of data. Actually, what if we think about smaller data sets, personal data sets, being open source, not scraping everything off the internet, resisting overuse of AI because of its environmental impact and the harm that it might do in people in other parts of the world who are busy cleaning up all of our data sets so that we don't see some of the disgusting things that are posted online. And then the deficit of surprise was thinking that what machine learning was telling us was something that we knew already, so it wasn't that surprising. And then where the magic happens is my particular favourite, which is why it's in purple. We're still trying to unpick what where the magic happens means, because it came out of a dialogue with practitioners, and one of the artists came up to me afterwards and said, "Erinma, I'm working on that. Where the magic happens, that's my theme." And so we're trying to, at the moment, write up a paper to look at the resistance of automation of culture and to think around the theme around where the magic happens. Where the magic happens really is about how those artists are using their personal values and their connection with the world around them and trying to understand it, and that something surprising happens. So some artists that we supported in dialogue had said that they were using machine learning as a form of collaboration to unpick them from where they were, to go beyond what they've already thought and come up with something surprising. So it was a real collaborative effort, if you like. But back to the theory, I think this Raman Amaro, who I'm a great fan of, it's important for us to look back at how we arrived at mainstream concepts of automation and the original vision of AI, which is about the automation of cognition, and with it comes perhaps this idea of the automation of culture. And how do we get there? We can perhaps think about the founding fathers of artificial intelligence and the challenge of their work that was co-opted by the US government, and who liked the idea of the word intelligence in relation to surveillance. And then, there were huge investments that went into artificial intelligence, perhaps at the expense of other versions of artificial intelligence coming to the fore, whether that considered, non-humans and other perspectives. And Ramon talks about this idea of, in his book, this notion of a life outside of an obsession with the social administration data. And if you're disabled, if you're black, if you're queer, we're always having to navigate this obsession with defining who we are in order to actually appear as human. But also this idea that, collectively with this social body that's feeding on a junk pile of fragmented experiences, and we now have this insatiable desire for the algorithmic, and let's see where it takes us. So I spoke very briefly about that. And then, so where could we look to in machines dreaming of machines? Getting back to that idea, there are other kind of systems or machines out there, and Hollywood might be one of them. I thought it was really interesting, actually, to see the Hollywood reaction to both dreaming about AI through the movies that they create and the Hollywood system and who gets to be an actor, who gets to write, who gets to direct, and so on. but then to come under the threat of artificial intelligence and the response of the actors. So with Brian Cox, I won't do his accent, but it's pretty hairy. We need to nip it in the bud, good and proper, because otherwise you're going to see everything's going to be regurgitated, nothing's going to be original, nothing will be new. Shows like Succession will merely be copies, they will not be original pieces of work. So in some ways, think about the migrant actors strike, are we thinking really about the death of creativity? And there's something unique about our species that wants to be creative. There are numerous Hollywood movies that have AI. And the challenge about these kind of Hollywood visions of living with machines, on the one hand, is that they perhaps overlook, they give a dystopian view of living with intelligent machines, but they perhaps hide the version of AI, machine learning, that now is pervasive and everywhere in every facet of our lives. And that's something to kind of think about. What does it mean to put out these visions of living with machines, which are completely out of touch with the reality of living with the machines in our phones and our screens and so on. So perhaps it offers or invites a critical discussion with the technologists developing AI and the public who become subject to these automated machines, and how we arrived at this reality in which automated decisions affect much of our lives. So the social media recommendations within healthcare, within surveillance policing, within the monitoring of our national borders, and often without our knowledge of it. But of course, some of us will feel that perhaps more than others. And if we look to Lev Manovic says, AI, in one sense, is now everywhere. It plays a crucial role in the global cultural ecosystem. It recommends what we look at, see, read, buy, etc. How do we resist that? And this is where we think about the tactics of resistance. It determines how many people will see our content. It helps us to make aesthetic decisions. There are thousands of intelligent but not very glamorous operations behind the scenes, and this again speaks to that hidden and sometimes quite harmful labour that goes in keeping this IT universe together. There's a few other artworks that I wanted to mention. This is from kind of an immersive world. So I don't know if people have seen this one. It's called Kiss Crash, and it, in a way, what I like about it is it takes this visions of the kiss in Hollywood movies, and then Adam Cole, the artist, brings all of these kisses together as AI-generated imagery and representation that explores themes of loneliness, desire, and intimacy in the digital age. And the technology that Adam uses turns a car crash into a kiss over and over again, kind of repetitively. And in a way, it's kind of a connection to our desire to look to Hollywood, but also to look away from it, especially being a queer artist, and that this exploration is an expansion of looking at the gap between real experience and artificial representation in the digital age. It's a really fascinating piece of work. The link is there for you to kind of explore it afterwards. And so, kind of thinking to my own students, and I always give them a kind of history of colonialism before we do anything around artificial intelligence, which means that we have to learn something about our British history that's not necessarily taught about. And you really want them to be thinking about what kinds of worlds are you bringing about when you're using these tools. And they get very excited when they see these, because they're like, how can that be made? I want to use that to make my worlds. I've got no money to collaborate with somebody. So I completely understand that perspective. But it's really thinking about what are the kinds of worlds that we're generating and imagining that other people are then going to navigate. So just starting to think about that. And then also, there's this convergence in virtual worlds now, and AI is, very much part of that, drawing from all kinds of things, impacting people's, impacting creative jobs that might not be the jobs that stand out. So, the animators, the illustrators, and so on. But also thinking about Benedetti Bravini's work around how AI can be understood as a set of technologies, machines, and infrastructures that demand huge amounts of energy in order to compute, analyse, and categorise, and using scarce resources in their production. So we've got, as a community, we face this challenge. How are we going to work with this and think around this problem of production, consumption, disposal, and waste, and the pollution, which again will impact people for the most part in the global majority. I always like to turn to like James Baldwin, the artist and writer. And, there was a social movement, an artistic movement that went alongside the civil rights movement. People like James Baldwin were an inherent part of that. So in turning to James, he was having this conversation about he had left Europe from America. He'd left America from New York and to go to Europe, and he was writing a book. And to write his book, he wanted to listen to Bessie Smith. What was really exciting for me about that was that he, in listening it, having left New York, he saw something else in the song. Changing his environment changed how he thought about the song and what he got from the song. And he pulls out kind of 2 lines from the song, which I'm going to, if it works, play it for you, in which she talks about there were kind of, there's a line that says, find it, that her house had essentially fallen down, which probably could have killed her, but she'd accepted this and gone beyond it, and she'd written a song that could be then shared with the whole world. If you look into that moment and into the history of Bessie Smith's Backwater Blues, you'll actually discover that she was talking about an actual flood that happened. And so the generosity to go and write a song about it and share it from 1927 to now speaks volumes about our kind of environmental disasters. And of course, it's for the most part black populations that were affected by this particular flood and will be affected by others.
Then look down on the house where I used to live. Backwater blues done caused me to pack my things and go. Backwater blues done caused me to pack my things and go. 'Cause my house fell down and I can't live there no more. I can't move no more. I can't.
There's a huge generosity in writing that song, and it speaks to a collective perspective in thinking about the millions of people that were displaced from their work and their homes, and looking at this flood path now and what will come. The rivers are moving. Those floodplains, although they're a great place from which food, agriculture can spring, we also have this massive challenge now about how do we live with the environmental conditions that we're in. Let me just move to the next slide, if that's possible. Take out a bit. See, Bessie's not done yet. Me not knowing her.
Bessie must be seeing.
Yeah, she's not done, is she? So I was trying to move it onto the next slide. It doesn't want to. Oh, there we go. Oh. I'm not very refined in my hand movements.
But she's also kind of singing about red
Forward. No, it won't let me. Bessie's just like, no, you haven't. Let's navigate beyond it, and then we'll come back to it. We'll come back to it. That works. It's not letting me do that either. Almost. I think that's close. Oh no, Bessie, stop it.
Throw me to play her again, isn't it?
She just will not. She wants a moment. Yeah. Fair enough. Oh, here we go. Let's use that instead. Previous.
That machine's taking over.
The machine has taken over. Indeed. Okay, let's just go to there. So a kind of note on methodology. Thank you. This is from Catherine McKittrick, who was exploring and planning and thinking about algorithms as kind of future-making mathematical equations that matter to black studies. They matter to black people. They matter to me because they're predicated on the negation of black life. So I have to pay attention to them. These algorithmic fictions they are producing a future outcome that I don't want. So the negation highlights boldly that Black life is rebelling against that system. But in that is in that tactic of resistance is also a creativity to that constraint, that barrier to think about, well, what else do we actually want in the world? And this kind of came up a bit in our study. So some of the artists that we spoke to, actually what you want is not a universalizing data set, but actually a super subjective data set, which can be small, even gathered by one person, a single person. So I tend to lean into that, and I think I really appreciate the act of data set making as a kind of act of artistic practice in its own right, and I really want to highlight that. So the act of data set making, kind of artistic practice in its own right, I think that's a really important thing to kind of think further on. And to do that, I wanted to bring in one of emerging artist in their own right, one of my students who's doing a fantastic, exciting work that I have these people who I studied with who are then like, I want to collaborate with you. And I'm like, oh gosh, I'm honoured. So Martian Gowan is making this installation. It's a work in progress. It's called Hermaphogenesis. And it's an interactive installation. And it's kind of prototyped as we're now speaking. And it's been to different places, Copenhagen, in Denmark. And it's examining the relationship between our bodies and the possibility of becoming through rearranging body parts, which I think absolutely, thinking about fixed systems and how we kind of rearrange them and get to a different kind of future. And so using touch and tactility as the starting point for that. So they've made these silicon internal organs that you can then create a kind of androgynous species with. And so if anyone wants to get in touch with Martin and find out more about their work or sponsor them to do something, please, here's their contact details. They're doing fantastic work. And this is where they are at the moment. So we have these silicon organs which get arranged, but it's the placement, the arrangement in space that then generates a text description, which can then be placed into an image generator to then imagine a creature from the text description. So here we are now. I think this is going back to this idea of machines dreaming of machines. And through a collaboration, really important collaboration, actually. And I think Martin's kind of idea is to turn this into a 3D virtual world version and a physical installation. It's been a physical installation, but it's rethinking the body and a body of knowledge. And in doing so, kind of rethinking collectively and rearranging how we think. And I think for me, that's the really exciting bit as someone who's interested in collective consciousness. But I wanted to go back to this notion of creativity. During the pandemic, one of the things that I found really incredibly frustrating was I stopped dreaming. And it was like a horrific thing to stop dreaming. But what I did start doing, all the thoughts that were coming into my mind from our workplace, being in our homes, I was scribbling madly all the thoughts in the middle of the night onto a piece of paper. And it kind of looked something a bit like this piece by Vera Molnar, who really allows us to think differently about generative artificial intelligence. And so I really invite us, when we're thinking about artificial intelligence and what we'd like it to be in the future, look back to these pioneers who are collaborating and thinking about radical systems. And her method was called Machine Imaginaire, and it was an attempt to really establish the early parameters for thinking about the intersections between art and technology. And you can see on this how unique the mark-making collaboration is between Vera as human and machine as the collaborator. And it's tangible and particular to their collaboration. I would invite people to kind of re-look at thinking about generative art, actually, and the history of that, and how that connects to how we're looking at generative AI and all that's wrong with that. So I'm going to end there and say, perhaps we could think about ourselves as human sensors, and that the code, the script, the song, the algorithm is what organises our lives. But we have an integral component in that to be both creators and collaborators. And perhaps this is the place from which we can imagine the future that we want. Huge, massive thank you to the practitioners and artists who allowed us into their worlds and their studios to find out more about what they were doing. obviously a research project is full of an incredible amount of amazing people. So particular thanks to Joe Bates, Professor in Data and Society at University of Sheffield, who invited me in to disrupt their project, which is now, of course, our project. We have a podcast made by Sanborn Bush, one of the research associates, which is online, and you can hear more about the work. For me, particular thank you to Amy Densley, research coordinator, without which no one would get paid and I wouldn't keep on time, and to Joe Lansdowne, who said yes to a partnership with Watershed for our artist residency with Craig Scott, the improviser and instrument maker. My Dartmouth are this bunch of people, Just AI Fellows. I was a Just AI Fellow during the pandemic, and we worked together online to rethink racial justice in relation to artificial intelligence, facilitated brilliantly by Liz Hickman. So please do look at their work. Caroline Ward, Sarah Chanda, Yasmin Boudiaf, and Irene Kubara Manuel. And that's me. Thank you so much.